Well, good morning. I hope you're doing very well on this first Sunday in June. You know, summer-like weather was slow to arrive this year, but this past week has offered some pleasant days to enjoy, and that's more important than ever as we stay close to home. While much of the news these days continues to focus on the COVID-19 pandemic, there are other matters we're watching, and one of those is on our agenda this morning. Michigan's auto insurance coverage and rates are going through some major adjustments, and we'll give you some information you need to be prepared for those changes. It starts right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, just over a year ago, the state legislature passed and Governor Whitmer signed bipartisan auto no-fault legislation to lower costs for Michigan drivers while still maintaining the highest coverage options in the country. These changes would not take place, however, until July of this year, and that date is now just around the corner. But the changes in the law means that policyholders will have to make some important decisions as their policies renew. Those decisions will determine the amount of coverage they have and the premium they will pay. To help prepare you for the decisions you'll have to make, we've invited someone to join us this morning who works with those issues every day. Kyle Zorza is a Marquette native and a personal risk manager with VAST, an independent insurance and risk management firm in Marquette. Like his colleagues in the industry, Kyle has received extensive background training on the changes that are occurring in Michigan's auto insurance regulations. As I welcome Kyle to the interview, we agreed that he can provide general information on what the changes are in the law, but individuals really need to talk with their agent if they have questions or concerns.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I would say we won't get into very specific detail, but we can definitely educate on the law and what's changing and some of the choices that people are going to have.
Let's start, by pointing out that right now, or before this change, Michigan had some of the highest insurance rates in the country, but they also had some of the most extensive benefits if someone was in a serious accident. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, obviously we have seen some really high rates in Michigan, and that's mostly due to the extensive benefits that we had, especially in regards to personal injury protection, and just covering people's medical bills, which has been unlimited coverage for the last 30 or 40 years or so.
So let's talk about the changes, and I think most of the changes they made in the law really affect the personal injury portion of the coverage, not so much the coverage on the car, I guess, right?
Yeah, that's the main changes are to the personal injury protection, just giving people choices now other than unlimited. You can certainly keep unlimited coverage, but then there's some lesser options that provide additional savings. And then there's also some changes to the bodily injury portion of the policy, just kind of the state default limits, and that's the portion of the policy that covers you against a lawsuit.
Okay, well, let's talk about what those choices are. Right now, or with the present coverage, people didn't have a choice. What kind of choices will they have under the new regulations?
So the new law goes into effect July 2nd. So starting in July, people are going to have options to keep their unlimited coverage that they have right now. They can go down to a $500,000 personal injury protection limit. Again, for medical bills, there's a $250,000 limit, and then there's option to opt out of coverage entirely. So you wouldn't have any personal injury protection benefits, and if you wanted to do that option, you would have to be able to provide proof that you are either on Medicare Parts A and B or covered by a qualifying health plan. And then there's one other option specific to people that are on Medicaid. So it's a $50,000 option if you're on Medicaid.
Let's talk about that for a minute, because I know when they were debating this in Lansing, that was one of the issues they made, that senior citizens didn't need this kind of coverage because they have Medicare. But is that correct? I mean, the senior citizens still want to think about it? Or should they just automatically say, well, I don't need that?
coverages that your auto policy that would give you coverage for, that there may be gaps if you're relying solely on Medicare. So there are some aspects of the auto insurance that would give you coverage that you may be giving up if you were to opt out entirely.
I was thinking about the fact that a lot of grandparents today are raising children. So if you opted out of coverage because you had Medicare, what would happen to those children? Would they be covered under your coverage still? How would that work?
So in order to opt out entirely from the policy, you would have to show that all household family members have qualifying health coverage or Medicare. So, if you have a situation where you have two grandparents that are both, on Medicare, they could, on an individual basis, they could opt just themselves out and leave a $250,000 coverage limit for say the grandson or granddaughter, so that they still have coverage. If that person also has a qualifying health plan, then you could potentially, opt out that person as well.
You said it's changing July 2nd. This will basically happen for most people when their existing policies come up for renewal. They're not changing policies midstream, are they?
Yeah, exactly. So if your policy renews after July 2nd, typically anywhere between like 60 to 90 days prior to your renewal, your auto insurance carrier will be sending some forms that just show your options. They ask you, what options you want to go forward with. And so you can certainly fill out the forms and send them back, or, reach out to your agent if you need a little bit of, education on some of those decisions. But then obviously there's a lot of people that aren't, that might not be renewing till next May or, next April, that want to take advantage of some of the savings now. So those people will certainly have the option to be, endorsed into the new law after July 2nd.
Let me ask you another question. If a family has several cars, for example, can you insure them differently under this kind of plan?
The personal injury protection is a policy-wide coverage, so it would just cover every vehicle would be covered the same.
When we return, we'll talk about why people really need to carefully think about the coverage they select with Michigan's new options. We're talking this morning about the major changes occurring in Michigan's auto insurance with Kyle Zorza from VAST. I talked with Kyle about the options people have: unlimited, $500,000, $250,000, $50,000, but asked if he agreed it was important for people to realize there is a huge gap between $500,000 and unlimited, which could be $5 or $10 million or more.
There certainly are some claims that get up into those really high amounts. When you think about it, your auto insurance, the personal injury protection, it's unlimited for your entire life. So if somebody gets, injured, badly injured when they're very young, 10 years old, and they have to have, continuing medical from the rest of their life, that can really get into be high, pretty high amounts. So that's where the unlimited is obviously the best that you can have, and that's where it kicks in, and is good that we've had it in Michigan for a long time. I'm sure there's plenty of stories of people that would be in a tough spot right now if they didn't have that coverage.
I just wanted to emphasize that because I'm not advocating it necessarily, but I think people should truly understand they're making a big choice here. They're going from that to something less if that's their decision. And what happens once that basic coverage runs out to most people? They're pretty much on their own, I guess.
Yeah, that's where they want to, make sure that they have other, health coverage that would kick in, but it's definitely not going to be the same for them if they don't have that unlimited coverage.
So what are we saying? Is it too early to know how the rates are being affected, in real time? I mean, are we seeing some reductions in rates that are meaningful for people?
Yeah, most of our carriers have already had their rates approved, so we're able to get in there and kind of see what the changes would do to particular policies. And we've been seeing a lot of people actually have been able to keep the unlimited coverage, and they're still seeing a significant savings each year. So it's been pretty nice to see that we're able to help people. They're saving money, but they're not giving up a ton of coverage. So it's promising.
I've looked at, I've done some reading, and I don't know how accurate it is. I've seen references to people seeing reductions of 10 to 15%, even staying with the coverage, and as high as 50% if they opt out of coverage. Is that what you're seeing, or is that what are you seeing?
It's hard to tell specifics. There's so much that goes into each person's policy, but we have seen some decent reduction in prices, and like I said, with people that are keeping unlimited or even just dropping down to the $500,000 option, they still have really good, that's a lot of coverage still, and there's still some some pretty good savings there. And then obviously the people that are opting out, we've seen some pretty low premiums for those people as well.
So we should point out that when people buy car insurance, they have a lot of choices. They, on the coverage on their car, whether they have certain types of collision coverage or not, whether they have deductibles. But those things all pretty much remain the same as they were before, the choices and the options that people have.
Yeah, for the most part, those portions are not to be affected too much. It's just that personal injury portion, and then the bodily injury liability portion of the policy.
So that's the part that people are going to really have to think about, as they make these decisions.
Yeah, that's the the other part is the bodily injury liability. So for a long time, a lot of people carry like 100,000 per person and 300,000 per accident, which basically means if you were in an accident with somebody and you were to get sued, that coverage would kick in to help protect you against the lawsuit. So you'd have 100,000 per person that's involved in the accident, and up to 300,000, total. So that's kind of an amount that most carriers or most policies have right now. And with the new law, there's going to be a new default limit. So if you don't do anything with the choices, your policy will automatically default to having 250,000 per person and up to 500,000 per accident. And kind of the obvious reason for that is with people being able to opt out of unlimited on their medical, there's going to be more likelihood for for higher lawsuits, where before you're basically only able to sue for like pain and suffering type things. Now it would be pain and suffering on top of potentially medical bills for people.
We'll continue our conversation about changes to Michigan's auto insurance coverage after we pause for this 2-minute break. Returning to our conversation with Kyle Zorza, Personal Risk Manager from VAST, I mentioned how the focus of car insurance has really changed through the years, remembering that in the times past, our primary interest was to protect the investment we have in our car, making sure we could get it repaired or replaced if it was in an accident. Today, with the high cost of medical care, those costs have become a major concern and a significant part of the cost of insuring our cars.
It's definitely something that it's not top of mind when you're shopping for insurance. You're only really thinking about your vehicle and how you're going to cover your vehicle. So it's definitely a big portion of the premiums and the reason why Michigan's had such high prices.
You kind of mentioned it already, I think, but let's emphasize again. If people don't do anything, if they don't respond to their insurance agent, if they don't respond to the company that covers them, what will happen to their insurance if it automatically renews?
So if, say, somebody has a renewal that's in July or August, they should, at any time now, if they haven't already, get forms from their carrier that ask them to fill out what choices. If they don't do anything with the forms, basically the policy would automatically renew, retaining the unlimited personal injury coverage. And then the bodily injury, if it's anything less than 250,000 and 500,000 per accident, it's going to automatically renew at that limit. So the nice thing is, they said a lot of the people, even if they're keeping those higher limits, are still seeing savings compared to their last policy term.
And again, to emphasize, there are a lot of factors that weigh into that decision, I'm sure, and it really is a good idea if people talk to an agent as they make this decision, because that agent can probably point out some things they may not be thinking about.
Yeah, we've been having a ton of these discussions for the past few weeks now, since they started sending out the forms. And yeah, it's just going to be something that each individual is going to have to decide, what risk that they're, willing to take, as far as their policy compared to how much they'd save. So I think a lot of people are happy to save money and not, increase their risk at all. They're, maintaining the unlimited and they're still saving. Some people are, just able to choose a little bit lesser limit, still have some good coverages potentially, and some savings. So just depends on the individual. And yeah, we're definitely here to have those conversations with everyone on an individual basis.
Okay, I think we've pretty well covered it as well as we can in this kind of format. Any final thoughts you want to add?
No, I just appreciate you let me get on here and help maybe educate some people. It's definitely a big change. It was a lot less complicated for everyone when they didn't have to make any choices, but it's nice that now they are able to, and it helps obviously for them to have an informed opinion when they're making those decisions. So I appreciate you letting me on here.
Well, as I said earlier in the show, with the changes Michigan has made with car insurance, we all have some decisions to make as our auto policies come up for renewal. I hope today's discussion has provided some helpful background information as you prepare to make those decisions. I'll be back with some thoughts about TV programming and sports after we take this break. Well, a few weeks back when I talked with Iron Mountain native and NFL Network analyst Steve Mariucci, we had to edit part of the interview because of time limitations. One of the things we talked about that we didn't get to use that day was that the COVID-19 pandemic has shut down so many athletic events that people are hungry for sports. All major sporting activity came to an abrupt end as people were forced to stay home, and now as they spend more time with television for entertainment, the traditional sporting events are not available to help fill that void. Major sports leagues are looking at ways they can resume play, including without fans. Well, here's what Mariucci had to say when I asked him about the possibility of the NFL starting play this fall with empty stadiums.
It might happen initially. It might happen. I think NASCAR is going to, have 4 races here this month. And they're going to see how it works. They're going to test all of the people involved, the drivers, the pit crew, everybody, will be tested. So it'll be a safe environment. It'll be televised because there's money to be made in television. People will watch it. And so it's going to be like, all right, does this make sense to do? It's going to happen in wrestling too. So we'll see. I think baseball's trying to figure out when they start playing. If they play, in Florida or Arizona or in their stadiums, and it very well might be in front of, empty stadiums. But the television viewing audience will be very important, because if people are going to be, sheltering in place, even if we're allowed to go golfing or to the beach or to the parks, if there's a sporting event on that's of interest, their ratings are going to be very, very good. And so I think it's going to start with no fans and television and see what the interest is. And I think it's going to be great. And then eventually we'll put fans in the stands. And hey, Don, it might be like restaurants where you're at 25 or 50% occupancy. I don't know if you let our even number rows show up for this game and odd next game. I don't know how they're going to do that, but it might not be full stadiums right away. It might just be, a percentage.
It will be interesting to see what happens as the major sports teams look for ways to get back on the field, the court, or the ice. The NBA and NHL are talking seriously about plans to complete their current seasons that were interrupted. And Major League Baseball is in negotiations between owners and players to start an abbreviated season. Most of those plans involve playing without fans in the seats, with the expectation of a huge television audience. What have we seen so far? Well, NASCAR has attracted large numbers of television viewers for races that were held without fans. And there was an interesting golf match that did the same. Over 7 million fans tuned in to watch four men play a golf match in the rain. Of course, the four men were two of the top golfers in the world and two of the greatest stars in the history of the National Football League. Golfer Tiger Woods paired up with quarterback Peyton Manning to edge out Phil Mickelson and quarterback Tom Brady. It was a close match, and Tom Brady even tore the seat of his pants to add to the excitement. It's interesting to note that sporting events have a long history as part of the world's culture, a history that goes back at least 3,000 years. The first Olympic Games were held in 776 BC as the ancient Greeks introduced formal sports to the world. But what has happened to sports in the modern era? The fact is, there's been a close correlation between the growing popularity of sports and the growth of sports on television. Television has not only infused huge amounts of money into the games, it's helped to expand the fan base to the highest levels ever. You know, long before the current pandemic, sporting events were attracting large and faithful audiences, and one of the best examples is the NFL and the Super Bowl game. This year, when the teams took the field for the Super Bowl, 99.9 million fans were watching their television screens. Some of those people don't even like football, but they were there for the Super Bowl because it's the most watched television broadcast of the year in this country. In fact, the 7 most watched broadcasts in U.S. television history, not just sporting events, but programs of any type, are Super Bowls. And Super Bowl 49, that was played in 2015, became the most watched American program ever in the history of television, with an audience of about 114 million viewers. Television has done a good job entertaining us as we've been forced to stay at home. And comedy and drama are great. But the bottom line is, we need to get back to sports on the field so we can watch them on our television screen. I'll be back in a minute. It's time for us to wrap it up and make way for the Today Show. I do want to remind you that you can also catch our show at uppermichigansource.com. Today's broadcast will be there tomorrow afternoon. Many of our former shows are available now. Thanks to Kyle Zorza for being part of our conversation this morning. Big changes coming to Michigan's car insurance, and I hope today's discussion provided information you will need as you make decisions about future coverage. And thank you for tuning in. Let's get together again next Sunday morning.